From my neighborhood, Stittsville. We have John Curry. He's a writer for the Stittsville newspaper, and he's been writing for the Stittsville newspaper for 31 years, or 41? 41 years. I knew that. I was confused. So he's been the writer for the Stittsville newspaper for 41 years.
Started when he was 10.
And we have the second guest, Sandy Durocher, and he's an independent writer, director, producer, filmmaker, and he owns and operates this Navigator Communications. And he has extensive experience creating, incorporating communications, video for business, government, professional profiles, new initiatives, training, marketing, you name it. So if somebody is interested, like creating videos, editing, professional profile, we have Sandra Durocher. So without further ado, I'll welcome John for your presentation.
Great, thanks a lot, and thanks for the wonderful meal. We really enjoyed it. And I thought I'd wear what I wore for the video to just make it feel more together. We'll get into the video very quickly. Just to explain, I was asked about a year ago by the Huntley Historical Society in Carp to make a presentation on the Grants, which is the Grant family of who lived along the Hazeline Road in Stittsville. And so, in thinking about it, I thought, well, yes, I could just give a verbal presentation and stuff. But then I thought, well, we should do a video. If you remember, a lot of you, I think, were at the last time we were here, we had the video of the bank robbery in Richmond. And so, having done that, and we just thought, well, we'd make a video about the Grants of Goulburn and present that at the Huntley Historical Society. So that's what we did, and next month I'm to present it to the Goulburn Historical Society, and then you folks were kind enough to ask us if we'd come here and show it here. So just as a brief introduction, the Grants of Goulburn, there was two prominent members. Robert Grant was a father, and he came here in 1819. He was one of the first settlers in Stittsville or Goulburn. And then his son, Robert H. Grant, was very active locally, and then he became the Minister of Education for the province of Ontario in 1919. So they both were very prominent. And so we can answer some questions afterwards, but let's watch the video, and then we can go from there. Okay? So roll it, Sandy. You're probably wondering why I'm dressed up like I am. I'm wearing my top hat and coat from bygone days because I'm here to tell you about a family that was very prominent in the early years of Goulburn. Hello, my name is John Curry. I'm the editor of the Stittsville News, and I'm also an amateur historian. And boy, do I have a story to tell you. So this is a story. This is the story of the Grants of Goulburn. Robert Grant, who settled here initially in 1818, was born in Limerick in Ireland in 1793, and he came to Canada in 1814. Much like a lot of immigrants today, that he was looking for a better life. He was a member of the small landowning class in Ireland, but he didn't like the restrictions of being placed on him, so he came to Canada and made his way here. and quite successful. We're standing in Brigantine Park in the Fairlands community right now, and right now we're standing virtually on the site of where Robert Grant's stone house was. And I'm holding a picture of the house. As you can see, it was a Georgian style house, 2-story, lots of windows, which was very unusual. The Robert Grant house had thick walls, a foot or a foot and a half thick. It had, as I said, lots of windows, and the front and back were mirror images of each other. In other words, at the front there was a center door, and there was 5 windows. On the back there was 6 windows. On each side there were 4 windows, 2 up and 2 down. And inside there was a central staircase, and in the right-hand room there was a magnificent, huge fireplace. And we didn't know that initially, and when just before it got demolished, when there was some study done of the house, they uncovered this magnificent, huge fireplace, and it really reflected the stability and it must have been quite something to be there in the 1850s with Robert Grant, and having a big fire in that fireplace would have been a very warm and friendly atmosphere, I'm sure. It shows, I think, the influence of his Irish heritage. He would have been familiar with houses like this back in his home county in Ireland, and so he built a home that he was familiar with, and that to him represented everything a house should be. And this house stood on this site from 1832 when he built it. It was gutted by the Carleton County Fire of 1870, but it's still, the stone walls were still standing. His wife had the house rebuilt, and after 10 years, the family moved back and lived there. It lasted until 1992, when it was demolished because of being vacant for 4 years and vandals doing a number on it. But this is virtually where the house stood, and it was one of the most magnificent houses. It was they say that many visitors traveling along the Hazeldean, what is now the Hazeldean Road, would stop at the Robert Grant house for the night, especially visiting ministers to the area. So it was quite the place. It sort of reflected his status in the community as one of the prominent leaders and wealthier people. Here I am standing beside, or I should say, lying beside the date stone from Robert Grant's house. As you can see, it is engraved with RG, his initials, in 1832, the date when the house was built. We recovered it in September 1992 when the house was being demolished, and have kept it since then. Hopefully it'll be part of a monument perhaps someday to the Grant family that would be erected in Stittsville. If you look at this aerial view, you will see on the right-hand side Pool Creek and the Pool Creek Valley. Pool Creek ran through the Robert Grant farm, and in fact it was a prime location back in the early days if you could get a creek running or a river running through your farm. And so he had Pool Creek running through his farm. In the middle at the park, you will see that's where the house more or less was, and then all the surrounding what is now houses in the Fairland subdivision was his farm fields. He had up to 20 head of cattle. He was also a businessman. He dealt in potash and lumber. And then if you went out his laneway, you came to the main road between what was Stitts Corners and became Stittsville and Bell's Corners. So that's now the Hazeldean Road. It wasn't called Hazeldean Road back then, but you will see the road, and that was where his farmland came off that road. I'm standing here at
at the new bridge that has been built across Pool Creek and Pool Creek Valley here, just near Robert Grant's homestead site. And it would have looked, the valley would have been much similar when Robert Grant was here. And there is some thought that he had a sawmill because he was involved with lumbering and the rights in Ottawa. So there was some thought that he had a sawmill. And if you look at the valley, the Pool Creek Valley, it lends itself to having a dam and building up a reservoir that could operate a sawmill. So I think he was quite fortunate to have this resource here at his back door, literally. And the other thing is that he would have had a farm bridge, and as far as I can remember, it was just about in this area where the new bridge is, and to get to his the back acreage of his land. Robert Grant, his initial landholding was 240 acres, and it went from what is now virtually Huntmar Drive in the west to what is now Hazeltine Road in the south, and what is now Maple Grove Road in the north, and then went over quite a ways from Huntmar to the east. And but Robert Grant was no stranger to owning land. When he died in the Carleton County fire, he had thousands of acres all across Carleton County, and he held a lot of mortgages, and so he knew a lot about how to acquire land, and he helped many settlers settle land, and he would hold the mortgage because of his wealth. So he had a lot of acreage. Here we are on Young Road in Kanata, formerly Goulburn, and the historic Anglican church is right behind me. This is a church where Robert Grant would have worshipped, and in fact, apparently the stone of this church and the stone of his house came from the same quarry. So, and he always led the singing in his church, and he was an elder, and he is buried in the cemetery that's right behind the church. We're in the historic Hazeltine Cemetery on what is now Young Road, across from the current St. Paul Anglican Church. And we're here at the grave marker of Robert Grant, who died in the Carleton County fire of 1870 and was buried here. He was an influential member of the Anglican Church community here. It's interesting about Robert Grant. He married his first wife in 1819, and then she died in 1859, and he married his second wife. And Robert Grant and his first wife had no children. Robert Grant and his second wife, she was 33, and he was 66 when they married, and they had 6 children by the time of the fire in 1870. So they had quite a young family when Robert Grant died. But it's quite amazing how he had so many children so late in life. But he was obviously a very vigorous and healthy man. It's interesting about his death. He had gotten out of the house, and then he went back into the house to try to get some church records and perhaps some of the church money that he was looking after in the house. So he was out of the house in the fire, but then he went back in to try to get these records, and that's when he succumbed to the fire and died. And this is his headstone. It's quite a substantial one here in the old cemetery, which of course is no longer used. It stopped being used around the turn of the century. And the marker reads as follows: "Sacred to the memory of Robert Grant, a native of the city of Limerick, in Ireland. 1870. He died August 17, 1870, age 77 years. So it sort of gives a synopsis of his whole life here, right in a few words on his headstone. As you can see, Robert Grant's monument is in the graveyard here is quite substantial. It probably, or not probably, it does reflect his standing in the community, his wealth, and the status that he enjoyed. It isn't your normal small marker, but it is quite a substantial one that even today is very impressive to anyone who sees it. That sums up the father, Robert Grant. Now let's talk about the son, Robert Henry Grant. He was born in 1860, so he was 10 years old when the Carleton County Fire of 1870 killed his father. In fact, the 10-year-old Robert Henry Grant carried his 1-year-old brother Jim from the burning farmhouse to the neighbors across Hazelbean Road. So right from the very start, he was always helping. And he had quite a life of helping in the community. He was a founder of the Hazelbean Rural Telephone Company. He was a founding charter member of the Hazelbean Masonic Lodge. He served in many positions in the Goulburn Township government. So this is the story of Robert Henry Grant, the son. Here we are at the Grant Crossing shopping area on Hazelbean Road in Stittsville. And the developers called it Grant Crossing because it was the site of the Robert H. Grant farm. What you're looking at here is a photograph of Robert H. Grant's farmhouse, which was built in 1885, and he lived here until he died in 1930. So he lived here during the time that he was the Minister of Education, and he also lived here when the Hazelbean, what is now the Hazelbean Road, was paved. And he was the MPP at that time, and he was responsible for getting the road from what is now Kanata to Stittsville paved, because it became a provincial highway. Anyways, his house was sort of a typical rural Ontario farmhouse. And of course there is the story that it had a ghost, and just like his father's house had a ghost. So ghosts seem to run in the Grant family, as well as doing all the community service that they did. Now we're going to use a drone to show you Robert Grant's farm property and what it looks like now. Robert Henry Grant, his farm was 120 acres, which is half of the original one. And Robert H. Grant's farm was located just over here, which would be where the parking lot is now for Winners and for Lowe's and for the various stores here. And can you imagine what is now Grant Crossing with its stores was at one time fields of grain and oats and cows grazing there in the land. Here we are, we're on Young Road in Kanata, formerly Goulburn, and we're in front of the Hazelbean Masonic Lodge. And this is a significant site in terms of Robert H. Grant. He was master of the Goodwood Lodge in Richmond in 1896 and 97, and then he was one of the charter members of this lodge when it was founded in 1913, 1914, and then he went on as a member of this lodge to become Deputy District Grand Master for the Masons in this area. So the Masonic Lodge played an important part in Robert H. Grant's life, and he was a member of this lodge. Here we are at the corner of Fernbank Road and the new Robert Grant Avenue. As you can see from the sign above, it has now been named Robert Grant Avenue by the City of Ottawa to acknowledge the great contribution of the Robert Grant family to the history of this area. And Robert Grant is, the name is to commemorate both Robert Grant, the first settler, and his son, Robert H. Grant, the Minister of Education. So it's a really appropriate name, and the road is going to run from Fernbank Road, eventually right through the Fernbank lands and through past Abbott Street and the new French Catholic High School, and it'll go up to Hazel Lane Road, and it will go through Grant Crossing Shopping Plaza and the Toys R Us, and continue on to the Queens Club. It's a real significant location and a real significant honor for the Robert Grant family. So that's the story of the Grants of Goulburn, right from, it's coming from Limerick in 1814, and establishing his farm and enterprises, and his son going on to becoming Minister of Education for the province, and now to commemorating the Robert Grant legacy, both father and son, by the naming of the main north-south road through the new Fernbank lands, Robert Grant Avenue. So we haven't forgotten about Robert Grant, and we never will now with the new road named after the Grant family, and it's a great and fitting tribute to these two magnificent pioneers of the Goulburn community. Just a couple of points arising out of that. You probably noticed that Robert H. Grant, the son, we had quite a few pictures of, and yet Robert Grant, the father, we didn't have any pictures of. We had the sketch of him, but we didn't have any pictures. And we always sort of wondered, you know, he lived to 1870, and there are pictures around of people taken in 1850 and stuff. So, and you think, well, he was really wealthy, so he obviously there would have been a picture taken of him. But if you think more about it, what happened in 1870 was his house got completely gutted. And so what was lost were any pictures that he would have had around the house of himself, which I'm sure there was one or two, were lost in that fire. So, and it was quite a fire. It's said that we showed you his headstone and stuff. Apparently, he went back in, and I sort of said it was because of church money and church records. We tend to think also that he probably went back because he probably had a lot of mortgage papers in there, and he probably didn't want to lose those mortgage papers. So he might have been doing it for the church, but he might have been also doing it to try to protect some of his investments. But in any case, they say that all that was found after the fire of his remains were 2 thigh bones. And apparently that's all that's buried in the Hazeldean Cemetery under that headstone is 2 thigh bones. But in any case, and the other thing, I'll tell you about the ghost story if you want. I'll tell you about the one for Robert Grant, the Stonehouse one. In the 1970s, it was rented out to a family, and they had a daughter about 16 years old, and she was sitting. There were some trees out front, and she was sitting there reading on a summer's afternoon, and then all of a sudden she got a premonition that something wasn't right, and so she went. She got up out of the chair and went inside the front door, inside the house. And when she went in the front door, she looked to the right, to the big room where the fireplace was.
and she saw in that room there was a man dressed in what she later described as pioneer clothing. So, and the man, when she glanced over at this figure, and he pointed out the window, and she looked out the window, and just at that moment there was a crack of lightning, and a big branch fell from one of the trees right onto the chair where she was sitting. So, anyways, afterwards she said the man, the two things she noticed about this person was one that because she ran away after she saw what happened outside, and then we don't know what happened to the man, to the person, to the figure. But she said afterwards, she said there was those two things that sort of identified the figure. One was the pioneer clothing, or the old type clothing that the person wore, but also the person seemed to be cut off at the knees. And then, so apparently what that means is that when the house was rebuilt, the floor was raised about 10 inches for the new flooring. And so apparently they conclude that this was a ghost, and that the ghost must have been Robert Grant himself, and that he was standing on the floor that he knew. In other words, the ghost didn't know about the new floor that was after his life, but that he was standing. That's why he seemed to be cut off at the knees when the girl looked over, because he was standing on the old floor. In any case, that's the ghost story. That's the story.
Very random.
If we ever see the ghost, we'll ask him. But in any case, so that's the ghost story about the stone house of Robert Grant. But anyways, is there any questions about?
How about the story of the other house, ghost story?
Oh well, Robert H. Grant, his ghost. Apparently, there's been Robert H. Grant himself, and also people that lived in after, right up to when it was, because it was just torn down when they built Grant Crossing. There's never been a ghost seen, but there's always been a ghost. They always hear a ghost. Many times ghost-like sounds have been heard upstairs, and they think that the ghost is walking from the front of the house to the back of the house, pacing back and forth. And they think it's also Robert Grant's ghost that's doing this pacing back and forth. So and that's happened to a number of people who have lived in the house, not just one person. So they tend to think that that place was haunted as well. So that's the Grant ghost stories.
Robert Henry, how did he die?
Which one? Henry?
Yeah.
Oh, just he was 70 years old, and he just died. Yeah, just natural causes, and then his son took over the farm until 65. But yeah, so yeah, no, there's nothing sensational about his. But anyway, so that's our stories about the Grants, and they are a significant family in early Stittsville and Hoover in the history.
Are descendants still around?
Yeah, no, at our, there's a woman who lives in Ottawa called Ruth Grant, her name is, or Ruth Gray, sorry, and she's a, she'd be a niece of Robert H. Grant, like a niece of Robert H. Grant's, one of his kids. So she was at our Huntley presentation, and so she lives in Ottawa, and there are some relatives who live in Halifax. And so
She was actually pictured in the when we were showing the second house. She was one of the girls in front.
you know, there was that picture of two little girls standing in front of the Robert H. Grant farmhouse, and she was one of them.
And then she went,
Oh, that's me.
Yeah. So
she saw it, yeah.
yeah. So yeah, there still are some relatives of the Grants around. But anyway, so we're doing the best we can to try to preserve their memory and what they did. It was quite an achievement. Like Robert H. Trent, when he became Minister of Education, that was, I don't know how well you know the Ontario history, but that was when the United Farmers of Ontario were elected as the government. They were a one-term government from 1919 to 1923, and they were elected for lots of reasons, but it was mainly people. That was when the rural areas started losing power to the cities because, well, there was the First World War, and then people started to migrate to the city, and there was great feeling in the rural areas of a loss of power and a loss of influence. And the United Farmers of Ontario just happened to strike a chord, and they got elected quite surprisingly in 1919, and they had a government for 4 years, and Robert Grant was the Minister of Education for all 4 of those years. He was the only United Farmers of Ontario member elected from Eastern Ontario. So, there's some, not controversy, but whether he was a good Minister of Education or not. And I think generally he did a pretty good job, and he would admit it. We have quotes that when he was speaking to people that he admitted he was just a farmer, that just a few months ago he was walking around in his farmer boots and tending his cows, and so he didn't pretend to be a highfalutin education, very knowledgeable, but he had a lot of common sense, and well, he remained as minister for 4 years, so he must have been doing something right. Anyway, anything else? Oh, I must just a quick update for how many were here for our bank robbery one? There were some, yeah. So there's remember at the time someone recognized the cottage? Yeah,
John.
yeah, and which was really weird, eh? like that was your family cottage, or
Grandfather's.
yeah, your grandfather, and that was where the bandits hung out after the not when you're family. But it's good. And just to tell you, we put that up on YouTube, and then we did get contact from the bank robbers' great grandson, and he was looking for information about Oscar Campbell, the main bank robber, and he said his grandmother. His grandmother was Oscar Campbell's wife, and so he wanted to know about Oscar Campbell. He had seen the video, and he had been looking especially for a picture of the bank robber, and he couldn't find one, and he wanted to know if we had one. And and he was very curious about his grandfather, but he said his grandmother never talked about him, and nobody ever talked about him. And he couldn't find his picture in the Kingston Penitentiary records or in any of the prisons that he had been in. And he was just, once you get history out there and start talking, these things crop up, and it's sort of neat, these sort of connections that get made. Anyway.
I have a question about what's this big fire of 1870 in Carleton?
Oh.
Can you give us about 3 minutes on
Sure,
that?
sure. Well, the Carleton County Fire of 1870 was in August 1870, and it started up near Pakenham, Blakeney and Pakenham, and I think it was a train ember started it, and just that day there was a high wind as well, and the fire swept from Pakenham and Blakeney all through West Carleton and down through sort of that strip that we're talking about, the Grand Farm, and down that strip, and it roared right to and only got stopped by Dells Lake in Ottawa, where they broke the dam there and let the water flow down, sort of what is Preston Street now, and that's where it stopped, or it would have wiped out Ottawa as well. And so it was, it destroyed everything in its path. It had been a very dry year. There was no rain all that year, and with the high winds, and the fire just roared, and it killed. Robert Grant was one of the ones who died. There was another, Mrs. Harden, an older lady, and a farm beside Robert Grant, who also died in the fire. And the fire resulted in it was the first time after the fire that the federal government paid some disaster compensation to people because they lost everything. And so that was the Carleton County Fire. There's a book probably available at the library. It's written by he's not related, but Terry Curry from Upper Huntley, and he's done quite a bit of research on the Carleton County Fire, and he has a book out about it. But the Carleton County Fire was quite a major, and it only took like 24 hours for all that to happen, and it blackened the countryside, and it was written up in the Globe and Mail, and it made quite a few headlines.
You should do a video of that. We'll see you back next year.
Well, we haven't thought of that, but I mean.
Well, John actually has another project that he's working on, which is
in
Richmond.
Yeah, you maybe don't know, but Village of Richmond is celebrating its 200th anniversary in 1818. It was founded in 2018. It was founded in 1818, and it's the oldest community in the area. I think Cumberland Village is a little older, but it wasn't in Carleton County. It's in the city now, but it wasn't in Carleton County. But in any case, Richmond is the oldest settlement. It predates Bytown by 10 years or so. So in any case, in 2018, Richmond is celebrating its 200th anniversary, and so one of the projects we're going to work on is that we're going to make a video. We're calling it a movie. It should last about an hour about the history of Richmond. So when we get that done in 2018, we'll come back and show you that. But so that's what we're going to be working on. It's going to take us a couple of years to get the various scenes down and get it. But I know how we were going to organize it. Now we just have to do it.
We're always looking for extras, so if anybody wants to.
Yeah, we want fame and fortune on YouTube.
So who pays for these? How do you get paid for doing these things, or do you, or is it just a gift to the community? What happened? How does that work?
Oh, yeah, I pay well, and and Sandy gives me, I think, a great rate, and we just do it. It's a good way of showing history. I mean, you can talk about history a lot, but sometimes it's the visuals are people remember a bit more. So and then that too, especially these days, you can put them on YouTube, and they can go,
You never know where you think.
yeah,
Right.
like Oscar Campbell's grandson seeing it there. So I mean, you never know. So it's a great vehicle now to, I think, to promote history. So yeah, so we just do it. It's just.
That's great.